Well, welcome back to Extra with LifePoint. We're so glad that you guys are joining us. And thank you again for also sharing this podcast with other people. It really just helps with the algorithm. So we really do appreciate it. And in this podcast, if you're listening for the first time, we just basically take a moment to talk to whoever preached at our Sunday morning services here. And we just get a little bit extra from them. And we are joined by Pastor Nick Wallsteadt. Pastor Nick,
Thanks.
hello.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's like clapping sounds in the background. So that's good.
There are
that's
in my
good.
head.
Yeah, I'm hyped. But
Thanks, Colin.
Also, I never asked this, but are you a Washington native?
Okay, no. So my background, military family.
Ooh.
Navy kid. So born in Texas.
Okay.
Still got the T-shirt.
Yep.
Don't mess with Texas.
Sure.
Born there. Then we moved to Hawaii. And then I say Hawaii's like my other home. So I went to elementary school in Hawaii, and then we moved here before middle school.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then I lived in Florida.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I blocked that out.
Yeah. That's so funny because you and Pastor Rusty worked together at a church for a little bit for a season, but your guys' stories are pretty similar in that way. I'm hearing it, I'm like, did you just describe Pastor Rusty?
I know, except he didn't have to live in Texas. He got to live in Germany. So,
well, there you go. I have a couple questions just about your sermon. The first question here is, you mentioned the importance of starting with identity over assignment in Saul's story. How can someone, though, practically discern the difference between their identity, calling, and assignment in day-to-day life?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I think that, I'll just talk about my own journey and story. I mean, I think especially when you're younger, you are younger in a good way.
Yeah.
It's really hard to I would pull a lot of identity from assignment. So I'm like, hey, if I had the title or the office or the job or the accolades, then I would really be doing it. That's kind of where it's at. I think really to understand the difference, you almost have to live into a season where your assignment dreams come true, but it's not fulfilling.
Yeah.
And then so you're kind of like, well, what is that gap that's still there? So I would say from an identity place, it's more like, whether it's counseling or a spiritual journey or you're really trying to figure out what are the pieces of myself that wouldn't change no matter what. So if I had a completely different job, I talked about this morning, I worked at McDonald's. If I had to go back to McDonald's, hopefully a lot would change in my life. Right. But what wouldn't change is on a core level, I'm like, well, I know I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I have value because of I'm made in the image of God. I have, so I think those are the identity parts. And then the calling is if I was back at McDonald's, I'm like, sure, what my day in and how I live out that calling at work looks really different. Yeah. But I feel like I'm still called to encourage people, empower people, probably, but it takes a moment where you're like, oh, wait, I felt like I always wanted this job and now I got it. Yeah. And why does this feel so hollow? Yeah,
definitely. And what are some pitfalls that you've seen with maybe certain people? I'm thinking this question is a great question for a young adult that is coming out of high school and they're just trying to figure things out. And so they have their eyes set on a thing, but they don't know who they are personally. What are some pitfalls and some advice that you would maybe...
Yeah, man. Yeah, being a young adult's tough. Yeah. I would love for you to give me some feedback on that. So think about that for a second.
Yeah, I will.
But I think that, I think what's really hard about being a young adult today versus when I was a young adult, I still feel young, but I'm late 30s now. Yeah. It's very easy to, it's much easier to project a curated image of yourself. Yeah. And so I think that can be confusing on an identity level and a calling level. You can kind of be like, I'm living this life. You can project it, but you don't have to necessarily always be living into it. So I think that can, understanding the difference, I'd say especially for young people today, of what's image management versus not. The other thing is, I think when you're young, probably correlating a lot of this to social media, I think. Yeah. That creates a lot of pressure to get there quick.
Yeah, definitely. It's like living for the approval of Instagram and
and projecting this thing. So I would say, obviously, anybody who's living into their assignment and their calling well and in a healthy way, they did not get there fast. Yeah. So probably having a reminder. What would you say? What are
Yeah,
some
no,
pitfalls you see?
I would agree. And I think for me, I did everything wrong growing up. And, it was had my eyes set on a certain thing that I wanted to do. And it's funny because it was being a pastor, but I was doing it for all the wrong reasons. I was doing it for the attention, the approval, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really understand who I was in all of it. Yeah. And it was just through a lot of trial and error. So I'm thinking about like maybe young adults right now that they're pursuing a certain career, they're off to school or doing any of that stuff. It's, you're right. It does take like time and it's slow. And we live in a world where it's like, I need something instantaneous and the approval aspect of it. Yeah. But I would say, man, it's found in, you going slow and also being connected with a church that can also walk with you through that. I think 100%. Is super important. So
I think, I think one of the reasons a church like LifePoint is so important, or any good church is so important in your life, is because, your identity and your calling, well, first of all, your assignment, like if I was going to think about them as building materials, I would think like assignment is like sand, calling is like gravel, and then identity is like stone, so they're not going to stack on each other, but that's kind of what it's going to take to change them. So obviously to change your identity is going to take a lot of time to morph stone. Whereas assignment's going to change. But I think all of them are like kind of transient in nature. So a church community, a faith community like LifePoint is like, oh, I'm going to plug my life in here so that when things change, there are things that like I can get feedback on the changing season. And there are things that are consistent even when you're changing.
Definitely. 100%. No, that was great. And then next question here. In the message, you talked about living out our calling regardless of our position. What encouragement would you give to someone who feels like their current work or role doesn't have real purpose or significance? So kind of coming back to what you were talking about before.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think that's all of us at some point. I mean, this. Yeah. We both work at churches. Right. So like I love my job. I love 70% of my job. 30% is still like, navigating CRMs. And like, what is this in the New Testament? It's not in there, but I would say that you got to find outlets for it. Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of obvious and it can seem cliche, but it's like, that's why it's like, dude, serve a church. Like find a place to serve. Are you going to find your calling if you serve coffee? Well, no, but you're going to view your day in and day out differently. Yeah. No, that's so good. So I think that's, or it doesn't have to be serving here at church, although that's an easy place to serve. Yeah. Do other things, serve other people, throw a neighborhood block party. I mean, just like find ways to go like, okay, if I hate my job day in and day out, it's probably harder if you insist on connecting calling to your assignment and you hate your assignment, I'm never going to be there. Right.
So, no, that's why I was kind of thinking. It's like, if a person is in that position, it's probably because their identity is so caught up in what they're doing. And so they're like, my life has lack of purpose. I hate it because they're correlating it with my job. Like I hate doing what I'm doing.
100%.
But I think you're right with like just different stuff, like whether it's serving in a church or, just finding different things. Like I love that, even with like churches, how a lot of churches offer amazing small groups. Yeah. And it's not just like everybody circling around together, but some small groups just do different things together. Totally. And it's different outlets like that. And yeah. Totally. Speaking of small groups, so with this podcast, we have small groups that meet throughout the week, and it's sermon-based discussion groups.
Okay, cool.
And so they're going to go through your sermon, they're going to watch it, listen to it, and then they might listen to this podcast. Okay. What's maybe one thing that you would want these groups to maybe lean in a little bit more during their group time?
That's a good question, man. Yeah, I would say, well, if I had a 1A and a 1B. Yeah. 1A would be, how's God transformed or transforming your identity? Okay. Like, how's it happening right now? Maybe you were this person now, and just what's that? Maybe just like talk about the change you've experienced. Yeah. And two, like, do you feel like you're living into your calling? Like even just kind of checking in with one another of like, how are we doing, guys? Are we, if none of us feel called, like maybe there's a moment where we're like, maybe as a group, you're like, why don't we go on this Mexico mission trip or something, So like, if you're feeling a collective sense of lack of living in your calling, maybe there's a moment there, or just checking in with one another on that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And thank you again for spending a little extra time with us and hanging out. We really appreciate it. So
thanks for having me.
Awesome. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our Extra with LifePoint episodes.